Sorry about that. Manufacturers don't have to prove that the product is safe. They don't even have to prove that it actually has the thing in it that it says it has on the label. Oftentimes, there's no regulation about what ingredients are inside that supplement or that herbal medicine. And this is legal. This is fully allowed under their classification as dietary supplement and under the law that regulates dietary supplements. When it comes to dietary supplements, they don't have to prove that the product is safe. They don't have to prove that it works. They don't have to prove that what's in it is in it. They just have to say it. And then if anyone comes asking, they have to allow it to be tested.
I mean, I think they're also, I mean, we can't call like heroin as a dietary supplement, right? I mean, so there has to be some, it has to pass, at least the
right. It has to be
first
something
filter, yeah.
It has to be something that isn't otherwise regulated. So like you're not going to go buy cocaine at GNC, but
and there's got to be some reasonable reason to think that it's not going to be outwardly harmful. But sometimes we don't know until we've got into enough people to know if it's going to be harmful or not.
These are businesses. They're going to want to produce something that isn't going to harm their clientele, obviously. So in most cases, a lot of these companies have done the safety tests, or at least have done the checks to make sure that the product they're putting out is safe and pure. But that's not always the case. So you just have to keep that in mind. The other problem is because a lot of these herbal medicines, because a lot of these herbal medicines are, things that have been taken for years or haven't had safety profiles done on them. They're just, plants that somebody said, hey, let's take this. We don't actually know everything that's in the plant. Plants are complex mixtures of chemicals. They don't just have the chemical that we want, they have everything else too. So there could be other known interactions, there could be unknown interactions that actually prescribed with prescription medications. And this is why it's very important to talk to your doctor or your movement disorder specialist or your PCP about any supplement, any herbal, any dietary changes before starting them. Because this gets back to the whole marketing thing. Is something safe just because it's natural? They want you to feel that way. They want you to say, oh, it's natural, therefore it must be good for you. But the problem is, natural isn't always safe. Plants are toxic. 70% of the plants on Earth have toxins that are harmful to us. Plants that we eat have toxins that can be harmful to us at high enough doses. But again, the dose makes the poison for a lot of these cases.
Yep.
Examples are tomatoes are in the nightshade family, but they don't have enough of the bad stuff to really harm us. If you're going to eat a can of tomato sauce, you're fine. But there are examples of where natural clearly does not mean safe. Things like nicotine and cocaine, purely natural, derived from a plant. Clearly not safe for you. Amygdalin, which is actually where we get cyanide from, is found in the stones of pit fruit, in the pits of stone fruits, like cherries and peaches. So that's why you shouldn't be eating apricot kernels. And hate to say it, but yes, organic pesticides. Yes, organic farming, which is also largely marketing, uses pesticides, and some of the most dangerous pesticides to humans are actually organic approved naturally derived pesticides like rotenone, pyrethrins, and neem oil. So don't think natural equals safe. I'm not saying that means everything in your cabinet that says natural is bad for you. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. It's just, again, be aware of the risks. Another thing that often gets asked when it comes to, well, why can't I take natural? You should take natural over synthetic is something I hear a lot. Or why isn't natural better? Well, let's take a look at the thing that's actually the benefit, the actual chemical that makes the drug. Natural chemicals. These are the drugs that are produced by nature without any human intervention, like the vitamin C and the ascorbic acid you find in your oranges, or the aspirin that's found in willow trees. Synthetic chemicals are the exact same chemical, but ones made by humans. They could even be derived from a natural source, but they've been processed and purified by humans. At the end of the day, they are the exact same chemical. Whether it came from a fruit or it came from a lab, what ends up going into you is the exact same chemical. The difference is that when it's a medicine that's been synthetically created and purified, it's going to be that chemical. It's not going to be diluted down or have other effects from the other things that may be included in the natural. So you have to be careful, because the synthetic may end up being actually work better for you, but at the same dose, it may be far more potent. So that's where the big difference comes in between natural and synthetic drugs, is you don't know what's in that complex mixture, versus when you buy a pill of cinnamon, you know what's in the pill of cinnamon. And there's even cases, yes, where too much of a good thing can end up being a bad thing. Many of these supplements aren't just straight up, here's melatonin. Sometimes they can be complex mixtures, like St. John's wort. It's just the plant ground up and not purified. So it's not going to have just the part that people think helps with depression. It's going to have all the parts of the plant. And the other problem is, when you get these complex mixtures and you start taking multiple supplements, stacking them up, sometimes there's a lot of things in them that can overlap, and you end up getting too much of certain things. A really good real-world example, I'm not going to name names, but there is a particular celebrity physician that for quite a while now has been promoting this series of supplements that he recommends stacking up, like I was just mentioning, like taking these 5 or 6 different supplements as a regimen to stabilize the nerve system. The problem is, almost 2/3 of the supplements that are in this stacked schedule contain the same amount of vitamin B6. Now, vitamin B6 is an essential vitamin. You need it in your diet. And any one of these supplements has a perfectly safe level of vitamin B6. But if you take all of them together, like this doctor is recommending, it could potentially cause B6 overdose, especially with the B6 that's coming from other sources in your diet. And this can lead to bad things like neuropathy and nerve damage. And in high enough doses, B6 can actually inhibit the activity of levodopa, particularly if you don't take it with carbidopa. So it's particularly relevant for PD patients.
This happened to me, is all I'm going to say. And, one of my concerns is that no physician had actually sat down and looked at all the labels of everything that he had been taking. And finally had got him to bring everything in. And sure enough, you look at this and it was 4 or 5 times more B6 than anyone should be taking.
So not just an anecdotal story. This is something that has been happening in several cases reported, actually.
I just want to mention too, B6 actually can be in like energy drinks. I mean, things that you would never think of to pay attention to. But I had another patient overdose on B6 just from too much energy drinks.
So just know what's in all the products as best you can, know what's in all the labels, and know the risks. So just some take-home points on what I've said so far before we actually get into individual supplements here. Just be aware that just because something's available over the counter does not always guarantee that it's safe or tested or approved, especially when it comes to supplements and herbals. When it comes to the dietary supplements, there's a lot of variability in the preparations and the purities and the contaminants they can contain. If there's a particular supplement someone's taking and it works for them and they always get it from the same source, no harm, no foul. But just be aware of everything and that's in everything and the risks and the benefits. Also be aware, as I was just saying, if you're always buying something from the same place, Be wary if you have to buy it from a different source, because manufacturing and batches can vary from company to company and even within companies. And many of these supplements, we don't have really good knowledge of their actual effects on the body, especially when they're complex mixtures. They may have not ever even been tested. So just buyer beware is the best I can say there. And that is the bottom case. That because of dietary supplement law in this country, judgment rests with the end user. In general, no one ever raises a red flag unless a red flag raises itself when it comes to dietary supplements.
And this is precisely why you need to talk to your doctors. And again, this is, want to thank you. It's ultimately your decision on some of these things, but I think it's always best just to make sure it's not interacting with something else that you may be taking. As I think we're going to cover here in a little bit, some of the herbal medications for Parkinson's actually contain high levels of levodopa. And so you could potentially be overdoing it with levodopa this way, for example.
So, tell your physician all the drugs, all the over-counters, all the supplements you're taking. Try to do it before you actually start taking them, or if you are taking them and you feel that there's something not right, definitely talk to your doctor. So after all of that, now you're probably wondering, well, then which ones work? Which ones are the fakes? How do we know? How do we look? Well, the most important thing is to see what the evidence says. And when I say as evidence, I don't mean, oh, my friend down the road took the supplement and suddenly he's lifting logs over his head, so that must be a good supplement. You have to look at the actual scientific evidence. And there's a hierarchy when it comes to the scientific evidence for testing any drug. We start in cell culture and animal models, things like that. No humans are involved. That's how we determine if a drug is going to have any kind of effect in the body. If that's a drug that's already out in the public being taken for things, we can look at case reports or epidemiology studies, get an idea if there's any effect in humans. But the next step is actually going to be doing the primary studies. Your safety studies, phase 1 trials, clinical trials, your cohort studies, your phase 2 trials, your randomized blinded trials. And that's where we start learning if a drug is safe and effective in people for the symptoms that we want to give the drug for. After a drug's been used for a long enough time, we start looking at the reviews. We do meta-analysis of all the different cases that have been out there. And that's what builds the clinical practice guidelines. Once a drug's been approved, once it's been used a lot, once we see what different doses work for different people, that's when doctors can start actually prescribing it. Now, obviously, for a lot of dietary supplements, this isn't happening or hasn't happened yet. But quite a few of them, some of the ones that I'll be talking about, most of the ones that I'll be talking about actually, have made it to phase 1, 2, some even to phase 3 trials to see if they actually are efficacious. So I'll mention some of that. So some of your best sources when it comes to do these herbals work are, it's the internet. Beware of the internet. Look for where your sources come from. Are they coming from a place called Natural News? Probably not the best source. Are they coming from the NIH website, from the APDA's website, Parkinson's Foundation? Are they coming from PubMed, from Cochrane Reviews? Those are probably good sources to look for what the science says, what doctors say, what pediatric advocates say is good medicine. Another source that I like to put out there is this link that you see at the bottom. So Concurrent Reports, which I just mentioned, is kind of like an aggregation site where different clinical trials and research studies just automatically get fed into under certain topics. And then on this informationisbeautiful.net website, somebody wrote a script that actually turns the data into an interactive site, which I'm going to pull up here real quick. And you can see, you can scroll down here and it has all of, you can filter it for the condition that you care about. So tell me, what is snake oil, or what is a good supplement for, let's go with mental health. And it takes all that evidence, it ranks it from there's strong evidence for it's working, there's good evidence, there's promising evidence, and then you have this worth it line. And unfortunately, you see that most things fall under the worth it line, where evidence is inconclusive, slight, or there's no evidence, or there's actually evidence that it's dangerous. A lot of people want to take or breathe lavender because it helps with sleep. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of evidence out there that it's working. People that want to take fish oil for Alzheimer's. A recent longitudinal long-term study recently showed that there's really no effect on cognitive decline. Conversely, there's actually a lot of promising evidence that St. John's wort may be good for mild depression. I'm going to emphasize here, just because I know the background of this, mild depression. Severe depression and moderate depression, St. John's wort doesn't help much. But just like seasonal affect disorder, it might help you. Again, talk to your doctor. So this is a fun little website to go through, look for different things. Again, it's just a guide. Don't use this and then run out to your supplement aisle at Giant Eagle. Get some ideas, talk to your doctor.
I think you might be surprised looking at that website, what things you think are completely benign that actually have some surprising side effects though too.
I was actually surprised. There's actually quite a few that I know people take for various ailments, and they actually end up getting listed in the harmful section. At the same time, there's a lot of stuff that you're like, I had no idea that that would actually be helpful, that ends up in the strong evidence. Like coffee seems to stave, there's a ton of evidence that coffee seems to stave off heart disease. So,
I'm gonna sip a coffee here.
let's talk about some of the most common supplements and herbals that I've had, or I've heard, or that Amber's heard patients taking or patients asking questions about. And we're going to start out of the gate strong here with one of the hottest topics right now, CBD oil or cannabidiol oil. So CBD oil or cannabidiol, it's one of the two main components of medicinal marijuana. The other, of course, being THC, the component that actually can make people high, can induce appetite, things like that. Pure CBD is just the oil derived from the leaves. It has effects on cannabidiol receptors in the body. It does not make you high. It does not pose a risk of dependence like the THC can. But again, that's the key word, is purity. Unfortunately, right now, CBD is primarily available in the states where it's illegal. It's primarily available as a supplement. So it's going to have all the problems with purity and concentration and variability that all dietary supplements have. So be careful. One of the reasons CBD got so hot is because there was some laboratory evidence for anti-inflammatory effects, antioxidant effects, and of course, inflammation and oxidative stress are relevant to just about every disease humans have. So
Parkinson's included.
Parkinson's in particular. But again, this is laboratory evidence. This is preclinical. One of the big problems with CBD oil is because the way marijuana has been regulated, there aren't a lot of good clinical tests. About the only one that's out there, the only FDA recommended use for pure CBD oil, and has to be a very specific manufacturer and very specific extract, is for certain intractable childhood epilepsies and pediatric seizure conditions. Beyond that, there's not much clinical trial evidence to support CBD use for anything else. Now, what about specifically with PD? Because every time I turn around on the internet, there's another video of people being cured with CBD oil. People are recommending using it for a range of PD symptoms. But keep in mind that a lot of this is based largely on anecdotal evidence. One person takes it and they seem fine. Could be pure placebo effect is the problem, because there's no clinical trials that have really looked at the efficacy here. There have been a few trials, though. FDA has been relaxing guidelines, and small trials are getting underway with CBD and medical marijuana. Some of the open label studies, so that means that both the doctor and the patient know they're taking CBD oil. They've seen improvements in sleep, in some of the psychosis symptoms of PD, even some movement disorder, movement scores. But keep in mind, none of these had a placebo group, and the effects were pretty modest. There's been only a couple double-blind studies that have been done so far. One did find movement improvement, and one did not. So the results from the actual placebo-controlled trials have been pretty variable. And all of these have had very small numbers. That's part of the regulation, is we're only talking like dozens of patients, not hundreds. There are quite a few studies that are underway, not quite a few, a handful that are underway, but we don't have results yet. So the bottom line is, because we have low numbers, low trials, we don't know the full safety, efficacy, or drug interaction profile for PD and CBD.
I just want to add, I mean, so people came to me and, were asking like, should I do this? And, it's all of a sudden made legal. Pennsylvania allows this in medical marijuana. And now our clinics are being flooded with questions, about this, and we have no good answers to give them. Unlike all the medications that we prescribe, I have no way of gauging in the same way how to have that conversation with my patients. And so I think what worked well is, kept the dialogue open. I could speak to some of the early evidence of, what you see here with some benefits in these few areas. And then we have to do like a case by case basis of like, well, what are you doing? How is it working? What's better? What's not? And, this is just not the way we typically do medicine, but this is the situation that still exists today. And it's been interesting to see, really kind of learning on the fly. Talk about real world evidence here. This is, I think, how we've all been sort of handling this since the legalization a couple of years ago.
So as with everything that I'm going to say today, talk to your doctor, especially in the case of supplements that you're taking for PD symptoms. Talk to your movement disorder specialist.
I do want to add, because this was an interesting finding for me, but the THC and CBD seem to have an impact on dopamine levels in the brain. Given that a lot of the medicines that we're using are also there to enhance and make more dopamine, there's potential for side effects that way too. But it's again, a big reason why it's important just to share this with your doctor so they can kind of follow along with you too.
Okay, so let's move on to another one. This is one that's actually been around for quite a while. Is the idea of taking creatine as a supplement. Now, creatine, hold on a second, is typically used by bodybuilders to build muscle mass real quick. It's actually used by the body in heart muscle tissue, and brain tissue to build energy real quick. So there was also evidence that the brain, just like muscle, uses it. So the thought was, if we take more creatine, we could target the energy building properties of the cells, improve mitochondrial function, maybe build up energy supplies, improve function of the brain. And this showed a lot of promise in the lab in animal models. Research that was done by Amber and myself have shown that creatine and mitochondrial creatine kinases seem to help against models of PD. And this made it all the way to clinical, high dose creatine made it all the way to phase 3 clinical trials to look for treatment as a PD drug. But unfortunately, those trials ended up being terminated because they didn't see any difference from placebo group. And this is just a lesson and this is one that's been around for a while and keeps going around because the science, the lab science, the preclinical science
so compelling.
But the best ideas don't always work when we try to get to the patient, and that's why we call it research. Unfortunately, that's probably going to be a trend for the rest of the book. Another one that's been around for a while, tons of promise in the lab, was coenzyme Q10 or CoQ10. This is an antioxidant. It's also an essential component of the mitochondria for making energy in cells. And the thought here, again, in the lab was, if you boost levels of CoQ10, you boost the efficiency of the mitochondria, and it could have a neuroprotective benefit. And we saw a lot of neuroprotective benefit in models. But CoQ10 suffers from the fact that it is not very bioavailable. You have to take very high doses of it to get anything significant in the brain. Now, one of the pluses of CoQ10 is it's largely considered a safe supplement, even at higher doses. It doesn't have a lot of side effects. There are some, mostly gastrointestinal. But the science that's coming out of clinical trials, unfortunately, seems to suggest that there's just not much benefit for PD, even at these.
So in fact, there's continued interest in CoQ10, and I'm wonderful to see the same thing with creatine. But the idea is that when they did these studies, this was several years ago now, they were using grams of CoQ10, and you had to take it, lots of this very highly purified form of CoQ10 in this one study. And they took all comers with Parkinson's into the study. And so now there's more thinking on this a bit more, that perhaps they need to be looking at a different type of Parkinson's patient, that maybe then you'll see something more definitive. So I think there's been some talk about doing CoQ10 again in a clinical study, but maybe looking at like a really early disease cohort. So patients that are really early on in their disease, that maybe there'd be more benefit there that you could see. The other thought was, now that we're getting better at genotyping, we know the genetic status for a lot of people now, that maybe there are some genotypes that are more likely to benefit from CoQ10 than others. So this story is not done yet.
Right. So, I mean, that's a really good point. That harkens back to our talk from a couple of weeks ago, when we're saying, like, even the nature of how clinical trials are done and designed is changing for the Parkinson's community, because we understand now that we can't just lump everyone with PD together and try to get something that works back. It's clear there's not going to be a magic pill anytime soon. But maybe some of these things work better in early PD. Maybe they work for non-genetic cases of PD. So when I'm talking today that, like, a lot of these phase 3 clinical trials were terminated or didn't show any effect, keep in mind these are older trials that just looked at probably moderate to severe cases of Parkinson's disease and didn't see any effect. So they may need to be revisited. So this study that we were just talking about actually concluded all the way back in 2013. That was using really high dose CoQ10 combined with vitamin E to make sure it stayed pure and had good absorption. And it was terminated due to lack of efficacy, but all of those efficacy that they were looking at were largely motor scores, and the progression of the disease. So as Amber stated, it may be time to go back and reevaluate some of these in a different design. A 2017 meta-analysis that looked at a lot of these older studies, again, suggested there was no specific benefit for PD, but again, these are older studies. So like she said, I don't think the story for some of these supplements is done. They're just not going to work for the conditions they were tested under.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of interest right now to if we can get better at identifying someone who's, let's say, destined to go on to get Parkinson's, this is probably the better time to use things like CoQ10 and the other supplements, when maybe there's more to protect at that point. So it'll be interesting to see how the field changes.
Another one that's been gaining popularity recently,
Even still, yeah,
is Reservatrol, or stilbene derivatives. This is a compound that's found, it's an antioxidant compound that's found in a lot of different fruits and nuts, like grapes and blueberries, raspberries, peanuts, dark chocolates, things like that. And again, just like a lot of these, lab work has shown that there's some neuroprotective effects in models of PD. But unfortunately, like CoQ10, resveratrol is inhibited by the fact that it doesn't get taken up by the body very well. So there isn't much bioavailability once it gets in. So far, there are no clinical trials that are looking at resveratrol. However, there's a lot of clinical work going on to try to find a more bioavailable version of it, because the preclinical evidence, the lab animal evidence, is so strong that this may have a neuroprotective effect. So this may be an up and coming one to keep an eye on. But again, because it's newer to the dietary supplement landscape, we don't have a lot of safety data on it. We don't have a lot of dose data on it. So far, I haven't seen much that says there are bad side effects to it, especially because it's found in a lot of foods we eat naturally anyway.
Exactly, yeah. I was going to say, I mean, because this is mostly being derived for a lot of people, they were naturally getting this in wine and all these fruits and in other plants. I think that automatically decreases the risk in a lot of people's minds, just because it's already there in a lot of commonly eaten things.
But whether or not there's actually a benefit, we don't know yet.
Yeah, yeah.
Another classic is N-acetylcysteine. This is another antioxidant that's readily taken up by the body. And most importantly, it's a precursor to the antioxidant that most cells use to fight oxidative stress, glutathione. So boosting N-acetylcysteine in lab setting and lab animals was a way to boost glutathione. There were 2 separate phase 2 trials that recently concluded. And there was a phase 1 trial that showed promise before these phase 2 trials that showed that if you actually do injections of N-acetylcysteine, it can boost brain levels of glutathione. Unfortunately, dietary N-acetylcysteine, again, suffers from this bioavailability issue. Unfortunately, the phase 2 trials didn't show the same effects. We weren't getting boosts in glutathione in patients. We weren't getting decreases in oxidative stress markers in brain or in the periphery. So for the body, N-acetylcysteine seems to help with oxidative stress, so in the periphery outside the brain. But so far, we haven't seen many significant changes in brain markers for oxidative stress when it comes to taking dietary N-acetylcysteine. So again, this is one of those where it may have benefits for you, but not necessarily benefits in the brain, not necessarily the benefits we're expecting.
Some patients are actually taking just straight glutathione. And, you know, my biggest concern with this one, and another thing to keep in mind with a lot of these supplements, is that glutathione in particular is really small. It's fragile. It gets chewed up by your stomach acid almost as soon as you take it. And so this is, I think, a big reason why, you know, people are paying a lot of money for these things and then taking basically amino acids is what we're talking about. And then it just doesn't do anything. None of it gets up into the brain, doesn't actually give you any of the benefits that they're saying will be provided by the supplement.
N-acetylcysteine is a building block for glutathione. So boosting it tends to boost glutathione levels. Glutathione is a peptide. It's a small protein. Your body just rips it back apart to the amino acids, including N-acetylcysteine. So really, people that are taking purified glutathione are just paying a lot extra for a lower dose of N-acetylcysteine.
And then again, it's just not getting up into the brain, which is where we really need it to go. So, yeah. I want to make sure there's time for questions.
Oh, absolutely. I actually don't have much more to talk about. So, but like a lot of these, there are further trials with N-acetylcysteine to try to explore these supplements. Another one, this is a new one, is Manitol. Manitol, this is an FDA-approved sweetener, and it's a food additive, so it's already found to be perfectly safe. And it does have medical effects on the body. It's primarily used to treat things like cerebral edema, increased eye pressure, and as a diuretic for acute kidney disease. It can actually force uresis. Now, the reason this became interesting in PD at all was because somebody decided to throw it at some flies that were a model of PD and found that it could inhibit synuclein aggregation. And based solely on that, a phase 2 trial is currently undergoing looking at the safety, tolerability, bioavailability, and efficacy of mannitol dosing in PD patients. But that's as far as this study's gotten. But this is one that's all over social media as, oh, start taking your mannitol. We don't know anything about it.
Yeah.
We don't know anything about its effects regarding PD. The results from those fly studies, flies, not even vertebrates, not even rats, flies. And the basis for starting this phase 2 trial are still a little controversial. They're still poorly understood. This is going to require some further study. So again, it's a sweetener. It's a food additive. It's already approved. It's safe. It just may not be doing anything. We don't know yet. And the last one I want to talk about is caffeine, and particularly teas. So there were some studies that suggest that that people that take a lot of caffeine over the course of their life have a lower risk of PD, and that's held up time and again in research. So the question was, what about increased caffeine for people that have PD? Caffeine has been shown to be neuroprotective in multiple studies. People that drink more coffee, more teas, more caffeine tend to have a reduced risk of PD over their lifetime. But again, when we're talking about these trials, they're looking for motor benefits in people with severe to moderate PD. A phase 3 trial showed no benefit from high dose caffeine as a treatment. So maybe, what if it's something that's in the things that you're taking, like green tea extract? And this is another one that green tea has a lot of polyphenols that were shown to be neuroprotective in the lab. And there was some anecdotal evidence that patients who took green tea showed improved scores on motor assessments. But again, clinical trials really haven't found much effect.
I just want to make a few comments here. So the neuroprotection in caffeine may be related to different between men and women. So that's something that I think is being explored right now. So just keep that in mind. And we typically recommend using caffeine judiciously. So if you're trying to, get to bed in another hour, don't be drinking a bunch of caffeine. But that afternoon slump where you may be feeling a little bit just more tired than usual, that's an okay time to be bringing in more caffeine. So just kind of know your limits. And I think one of the other big takeaways for me for caffeine specifically, I think a lot of people, and the reason we want neuroprotection is you want to protect the cells that are still there in your brain and working well. That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to make the motor symptoms better. The hope is that it really slows down the progression of disease. And depending on how the study was designed, they may not have been looking for that. Right. So, I think, again, this really just goes into, you get out what you put in for clinical trials. And so I'm expecting that there's going to be some rehashing of clinical trials with some of these supplements. So all hope is not lost.
Yeah. So when I say that these trials haven't found anything, don't take that as, oh, it doesn't work. It just didn't work in that trial. So, and when we were talking about some of these supplements that are perfectly safe and have been found relatively safe, like caffeine and Reservatrol, things like that, we're not saying stop taking it because it doesn't work. Talk to your doctor, obviously, but we need to do more tests to see if it does work, what's the best way to make it work.
The other thing that I am expecting to start seeing is some of these supplements work in slightly different ways on different parts that we think are causing Parkinson's. And so I think we may start seeing combos of these supplements to see if there's maybe some benefit there, while also going to an earlier Parkinson's population. So
just quickly summarize, because we could spend all day talking about these supplements. There's hundreds I didn't even think to touch on, some of which actually probably be better talked about as medicines because they actually contain things like L-DOPA. But these are some of the top ones, but clinical evidence is scant, non-existence for many. It's buyer beware, consider all the risks and benefits, and talk to your doctor. And with that, I want to open up for questions.
So we had a lot of really good ones that came through. So I was gonna. start here. So there was a question about injections of glutathione. So Dr. Perlmutter is a well-known neurologist. He had been advocating for this in the past. That makes more sense. It's really when you have glutathione, which again, it's this tiny little molecule, it gets chewed up by your stomach acid. If you inject it directly, that's more likely to get up into the brain. So that makes more sense. Choline, I don't really know much about choline in relationship to Parkinson's disease. But I am assuming it's, a lot of the same idea that this is helping like other enzymes, other antioxidant properties within the cell. These are typically ways of trying to make it so that there's less, reactive oxygen species and oxidative stress within the Parkinson's brain. I'm guessing that any one of these supplements by itself is not going to be sufficient in slowing down Parkinson's. And I think the data has shown us that at this point, but is there some benefit still to be had from these more natural supplements? I think there's something there. I just don't think we've been sophisticated enough in trying to figure it out, but I think we're heading that direction. I also don't think there's any supplement that replaces things like Cinemet, for example. We didn't have a chance to cover things like there's Ayurvedic medicine, so
I was actually trying to bring that up at the end. So like mucuna which is the legume, the bean, that's used in Ayurvedic and Indian medicine that actually has L-DOPA in it. And a lot of people actually are taking that. The big problem with that is they're also taking Cinemet. And it's a plant, so it's going to have various levels from year to year, from plant to plant. So it's just one of those things where you have to be careful and talk to your doctor.
So I had a patient who insisted on using only the Ayurvedic medicine, and it was really hard to manage. Like I couldn't keep her in a really good state all the time because it was so variable from like dose to dose, like how she was going to feel. And it's already complicated just with like what you just had for breakfast affecting things like Cinemet, that when you're adding in the complication of, these, impurities, let's say, it makes it more complicated. On the other side, though, a lot of people would argue that with the Ayurvedic medicine, you're getting all the impurities, and perhaps it's the combination of the impurities plus all the other chemicals that are in a natural being that are actually giving you the better benefit in the long run. This is what a lot of, but behind a lot of what's being discussed with Ayurvedic medicine. At the end of the day, it's just don't double up and make sure that your doctors know what's going on. I really wanted to cover this one question. There's about how do we define early PD? This is a really critical question. So there have been many attempts from the Movement Disorder Society, so the sort of a governing board for us movement docs, to really sit a bunch of professionals down and say, okay, what do you think is the best criteria? And this has been updated a couple of times. I think it's been a couple of years now for the most recent criteria. And in general, there's, just like we have some criteria to know that it's Parkinson's disease and not something else, they have tried to do this for early Parkinson's disease, because it can be really hard to know that you have Parkinson's disease and not something else. Some of the other atypicals can all look the same in early stages. And so a lot of it is things like responsiveness to levodopa. Let's say it's how things progress and how fast they progress. By definition, Parkinson's disease gets worse, and hopefully we can fix that. But we will rely on that because it has been the truth about Parkinson's. It's not something that just spontaneously gets better. And so we look over time to see if there are changes. And then we really stick to a lot of the classic symptoms we expect to be there. There really needs to be slowness. Like that's like the key symptom of Parkinson's. There has to be slowness. But the stiffness and, there may or may not be a tremor, but the other issues are with postural stability and more tendency to fall. So we really rely on those cardinal symptoms of Parkinson's. And there are some other testing that we can do to help confirm this that is not part of the criteria right now. But there are ways of boosting your confidence with some imaging. I do expect in the not too distant future that we will be seeing blood tests for things like Parkinson's, maybe not necessarily to diagnose it earlier as much as to distinguish it from other Parkinsonisms. I think we're actually not too far off from finding something like that. And that's a great book, the Natural Therapies for Parkinson's Disease. It's a good one to review. I think the Parkinson's Foundation also has their own like pamphlet or something too that was pretty good.
I did want to touch on, actually kind of just group some of these together. I apologize for not touching on choline because I know there's a lot out there when it comes to choline. What I might actually do is do a little bit more research and come back with that one next time, since multiple people asked on it. But there were several people that asked about things like spirulina or willow bark tea or things like that. One major problem that we have when it comes to supplements and people that push supplements and naturopaths is you can literally type any nutraceutical or any supplement and then any disease, and you're going to find something on the internet that says take X for Y. And that comes up a lot with Parkinson's disease because everyone wants to try to find something that works. But when it comes to something like spirulina, that's just blue-green algae. And again, it's a complex organism. So it's going to have a lot of vitamin B, vitamin C, vitamin A, things that are probably in a lot of other vitamins and supplements and diets that you're already taking. And
I think that's the big takeaway is like, if you're going to take something, know what it is why you're taking it. Like, what do you think you're trying to impact by taking it? If it's just because someone's been talking about it, I really think you need to know why you're doing it.
Absolutely. And that's what I was trying to emphasize today. I wanted to give you the science that's behind some of these more talked about, more common supplements. Because at the end of the day, when it comes to dietary supplements, everyone's going to try and sell you something. You want something that there's a reason why they want to sell it to you, not just because they can.
The last thing I want to talk about too is the cost of these things. Sometimes they're not covered by insurances, and I've just been heartbroken for some of the patients that I've been with. I mean, they're not purchasing their prescriptions; they're paying someone into their pocketbook for these supplements that really may not be working. And so I just caution from that regard, because I feel like that is actually harming patients more financially perhaps, but also with the added risk that it could be devastating to their health too. So just keep all that in mind. If it's really expensive, you should really be thinking about it a little bit harder. But generally, if you've been taking something, you think it's working, your doctor knows about it, you're not having side effects from it, and you can afford it, keep up with it. I love Benzie already. So there's a lot of this in Parkinson's where there's a lot of snake oil salesmen, let's say. So it's really prevalent with PD. So just be aware, buyer beware. Thanks for putting up the link there, David.
So I had a couple of people ask on, what does it, when these dietary supplements are manufactured, what do they really mean by pure? How can you check the purity? Can you trust third party? So again, all I'm going to say is these things are not regulated by the FDA the way food and drug are. So they don't have to conform to very strict regimented, USDA guidelines or FDA guidelines. That said, again, most of these companies are honest companies. They don't want to harm the people, because that has happened in the past and those companies really got burned. So yes, some of these companies do opt for third-party testing or do regular testing of their products. You can always ask the company if you're really concerned. but always take whatever they're saying as far as purity and dosing and everything like that with a grain of salt, because there's no set guidelines for how to test these things.
And so the general recommendations again is kind of what I was just saying. I mean, do your homework, look this up, try to understand why you're taking it. Make sure you've disclosed this with your physicians. And, you know, again, same thing. If it's not harming you, you've taken it for a while, you think there may be some benefit and you can afford it, and it's not interfering with other drugs you're taking, this is generally, you know, considered acceptable to most physicians. Oh, so that's a good question. So how many neurologists are open to talking about natural therapies? So maybe push them to try to understand, you know, what it is that you're doing, and you know, see if they can do their homework as well to try and understand what some of these things are. They're allowed to give their opinion. They may think that, you know, they're not worth it, you know, but there should still be able to talk to your doctors about that. And really, even if it's just from a perspective of, is this safe given everything else that I'm on, that really needs to be, a discussion needs to be had, period. Looks like Marlene has had a good experience. I'm glad to hear that.
Well, we've come to the end of the hour, and I'm sure you guys need to get back to work also. But this was really informative and helpful, and you know, an area that folks have a lot of interest and concern about, because you know, the therapies can be so expensive, and you know, especially in terms of neuroprotection or disease modification, how would you know? You know, so you pretty much have to go with the gut, or the gut brain, I guess, in that case. And you know, if you're able to afford it, there's some science behind it, and it's something that you'd be willing to, you know, take for the long haul. I guess talk with your doc.
Yeah. It's actually a good point. So a lot of these medicines are not something where you would necessarily feel an effect right away. That some of these benefits are meant to be had over long periods of time. Mm-hmm. They're not meant to, you know, they're not Cinemet, right? They're really there to help protect the cells that are still there and keep them healthy. Yeah, it's a good point.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much again. And Dr. Victor, are you able to share your PowerPoint presentation? And if you send it to me, then anyone that's interested in checking it out, we can get it to them also.
Things we didn't cover.
I'll add in the section on choline, and then I will send you a link.
Wonderful. Thank you. All right. Any last questions, folks, that you'd like to ask?
I have a last question for Amber and Victor. Are you aware of the Parkinson's research group on Facebook?
He's my Facebook guy.
I'm with it. I'm not familiar with that one. The one that I really like is the Science of Parkinson's that's on Facebook.
That's a really good one.
It's not just on Facebook. They have a website, everything like that. They are really good at summarizing the latest research, writing it in a very easy.
It really breaks down the science. I think in a way that,
to make it really easy to grasp, and they stay on top of things. So that would be the best kind of research site I go to, and I would recommend people look at.
So is the Parkinson's research group, is this patients, or are there other physicians? And
it was formed by a Parkinson's patient that's an engineer.
Yeah.
And then there's other researchers on there, but it's global, it's international. And I find it a little hard to participate because I'm not a researcher, but
okay, so it's very sciencey then. Okay.
But they do put it in the terms that a lot of Parkinson's patients are on it, because they go from the approach that they're not hearing this and they're taking it into their own hands to do their research. But one
Yep.
thing that came up on that site was about, and this is a very bad natural topic, but it's kind of gross, but fecal implants. And
Yeah,
they've got,
yeah.
and they just
Yeah, we
put
didn't
all
even get a
kinds-
chance to talk about like all the probiotics and all of the, again, gut access. I think we should probably do a whole separate section on
Yeah, that-
just
that
the
could be a
GI
fun
brain. Yeah.
Right. So that's another area that I think we could have a seminar. If you guys would address that, it would be great because I really love your talks.
Yeah, I think maybe we should do that next time then, because it's been coming long time brewing. So yeah, that's a good idea. Okay.
That's like a last resort. I know everybody's thinking, oh, what else do we have to do to fix this?
It's not as bad as it sounds. That's all I'm gonna say. It's like no one wants to think about it, but it can work for some things. So
Yeah, but that's
It's shocking. It seems to be working for a lot of things. They're doing trials for everything from ADHD to colitis to everything with these.
Yeah.
It's quite remarkable.
again, most of your immune system's coming from your gut, and so I think it makes a lot of sense, right? It kind of passes that first test,
yeah, it's easier to get into the gut than get into the brain, right?
Absolutely.
Let's keep finding a solution.
All
Okay,
righty,
well, good luck.
gang. Well, thank you all. Thank you, Drs.
Thanks,
Van
everybody.
Laar, and thanks for all your participation, folks. We'll
It's
see
a pleasure always
you
doing here.
next month, let's say.
Wow.
Have a great weekend.
Thank you. You all too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.